Hi, this is David Cross, your Historical Expeditionary, and I want to talk to you today about Tony Horwitz. Tony Horwitz died on Monday, very unexpectedly. He was a 60-year-old author, and I want to talk about him a little bit because to me it's as if I've lost a friend. I never met Tony Horwitz, but he had such an engaging and open and generous writing style that brought you into his life and his thinking, and you did feel like you knew him. And I think Tony's books, especially one book in particular that I'm going to talk to you about, I think he affected me more than any other writer in my life. I really think he did, as I sit here and think about him. Now, he wrote a book entitled Confederates in the Attic. Confederates in the Attic. And this is a seminal, amazing, incredible book that if you have not read it, you should read it. And I'm sitting here today thinking about all the ways this book affected me. Now, first of all, I was living out in Lexington, Virginia at the time. So that's the cradle of the Confederacy. It's where Stonewall Jackson is buried. It's where Robert E. Lee is buried. And this was really the first Civil War book that captured me. It's kind of a gateway book. It did more than that, though. Tony would write about the joy of discovering history. You know, I call myself a historical expeditionary. Would I do that if I had not read this book and his other books? I don't know. But the idea really does come from Tony Horwitz, I think. I mean, Tony's books were always a story, an expedition, a trip. And he took you onto the trip. And so it took two of my favorite genres, history and travel literature, and it turned it into one. And I'll tell you, much harder thing to do than it looks. I wrote a book called Chasing History, One Man's Road Trip Through the Presidential Libraries. I think this is what inspired that. I don't think I ever would have written that book if I hadn't read Tony's book. And it took me a couple of years longer than I thought it would to write it because Tony makes it look so easy to mix those two things. Tony's book on the Civil War is even more important today, I think, than when it was written, because we're in such a time of division. And like Tony, I felt allegiance to both sides. I live in Philadelphia. I grew up in Virginia. I went to law school in Lexington. And, you know, when the incidents happened at Charlottesville recently, people in Philadelphia, I remember we were having a dinner party, and to the people in Philadelphia, the idea of the Southern way of life always meant civil rights, inequality, race. And I had to say to them, no, there's all this other stuff too. I mean, I'm not saying those things aren't out there, but there's a different way of being. There's a different way of time in the South. There's less interest in money, more interest in land. I mean, it's a different place, and there's some beautiful aspects of it. And Tony could have written this book. You know, what this book is, for those of you who don't know. Tony Horwitz, who at this time had already won a Pulitzer. He wrote for the Wall Street Journal. He wrote in Baghdad. He went to war-torn areas where he's at home in Virginia, and he hears shooting, it sounds like, outside. And he goes out, and he finds these reenactors. Robert Lee Hodge is the man on the cover. He's the man who he writes a great deal about in the book. Robert Lee Hodge, who says in this book, history and geography, the greatest 1-2 punch, something like that. Again, all these things, they've become such a part of me that it's interesting for me to realize how important Tony Horwitz's writing was to the direction I ended up going. When I picked up this book, I was in law school. I was studying to be a lawyer. I wasn't looking at history or history tours or being a history expeditionary or anything else. But this is the kind of book, when you read it, you want to run out and you want to do the things that are in here. You want to see these places. You want to go to Antietam and Gettysburg. You want to go see reenactors. You want to experience it. Tony, you know, history is more than just sitting in a book reading. That's really what I tell people every single day of the week. And you got to go out. It's why I talk about chasing history. You chase it. It's an active pursuit, and nobody ever chased it more actively, more engagingly, more interestingly than Tony Horwitz did. He wrote a book that was entertaining and humorous, but he didn't take cheap shots. It's so easy in this day and age to take cheap shots, and he had an ability to meet someone and become part of their life, even if it's for 2 days or 3 days or a few hours. I mean, somehow he would get himself into these people's homes. He would meet their families. He would get in their trucks, as he talks about. He would get to know them, because that's what interested him, people. And what interested him was their allegiance, in this book, their allegiance to the South, for those Southerners. He looked at various different ways on issues between the North and the South. Traveled to Civil War spots, dressed with reenactors, marched with Robert Lee Hodge. It upset a lot of people, this book, at the time, a lot of reenactors. But now I think reenactors realize that it brought so many people to their world. It caused people to do it. 2 books made me just do some different things. One was Bill Bryson's work, a book about walking along the Appalachian Trail. I mean, it was very humorous, and it was in ways described as such a miserable experience. But I read that book, and I had to hike the Appalachian Trail. I had to feel that, because it was also described feelings of just such transcendent bliss. And that's exactly what I found. That's why books is the most wonderful thing in the world, because they could bring you inside, on a deeper level. Bring you inside to people's feelings and intellect and substance of things. And so that was one book, and then this was the other book. It made me want to learn about the Civil War, and so I got Shelby Foote's books, and we do a Gettysburg tour. Going to go out to a Gettysburg seminar in a couple weeks for a few days. I am a historical expeditionary, and I think about all of these things, and I think about how much I owe Tony Horwitz for all of this. Guy I never met. He never met me, but he changed my life. He took his experience and he explained it in such a brilliant and captivating manner that you couldn't help being swept up in it. And so I just want to bring him up to all of you today. It's a terrible loss. He's got a new book out, which I have not yet read. He was on a book tour, taking a walk, and part of me thinks, well, it's not fair that he died. He should have survived this heart attack, and he should have told us about it. He should have told us. He should have gotten better. He should have gone to the hospital. He should have had that fear of death, and he should have survived it, and he should have shared it and he should have been able to tell us about it, and he should have been able to remain on this planet for decades more than he did. It reminds us all how precious this is and how careful we have to be to live every minute as if it might be our last. So thank you very much, Tony Horwitz, for all of the books. I only talked to you about one. He wrote a brilliant book on Captain Cook. He wrote a very fun book about Australia. Anything you can find written by this tremendous writer, you should get. But if you haven't read Confederates in the Attic, that's a life-changing book. I suggest you get it. And thank you very much for listening.